about it.
Dying in the heat.
Yeah, if you feel like watering it for me, please do.
It does look like it's dying.
No, I might do it again.
You can stay out here if you want.
No, I've got to do my live frost now.
Okay. The most difficult thing about attempting to find a community of people who think and feel the way you feel about the world, especially when your view becomes sufficiently spiritualized, is that one of the middle teachings, I think, in the spiritual path is ultimately to shut the hell up. It's ultimately to shut up. Because in the end, everything is everything else. This book is The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. And its premise is that the structure of reality is holographic rather than material. And the justification for this and the explanation for this, you kind of need to visualize it. Has a lot to do with the idea of the 4D. Gosh, these flies are driving me crazy. When you look at a hologram, when you kind of take the properties of it and you apply that to the material world, it makes a lot more sense that the material world is actually a holographic world. And let's break down the properties of a hologram. The most important part, a small piece of the hologram, contains the whole. And this is the most important concept in Talbot's holographic universe concept. And it's not just his, it's Stanislav Grof and Karl Pribram, and I think it's Ernest Bohm. But ultimately, when you fracture the hologram and you take a piece of it, it contains all the information in the whole, albeit at kind of a smaller bit version. And this is why we experience what we experience, like precognitive dreams and synchronicities and divine timing. It's ultimately because we're all a part of this grand holographic structure. And the material world that we experience, which Talbot calls the explicate, arises from this much more closely hidden world called the implicate, which isn't inaccessible, but just is not accessible through the same pathways as, say, me being able to pick up this water bottle. The way you access the implicate is through secondary or almost like clues, like triggers. A really great example is tarot. And the reason I think tarot works so well is because it acts as an interface between the explicate and the implicate, and you're able to access information from the tabula rasa, or not even the tabula rasa, it's like before tabula rasa. It's the state in which everything exists and there's no time and there's no space. The moment you reach for something, it has already become something different because you have affected it by reaching for it. It's this sort of perfect state, and it exists completely outside of time and reason. And in a lot of ways, I think that it's heaven, and I think that this is where we reach when we go to heaven, or when we're in that after-death state. The first time I've not read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but the first time I read a synopsis by a Rinpoche of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I had a little giggle to myself and I was blown away because I couldn't believe that someone had just laid out for me so simply one of the most timeless and enduring mysteries of the human life, which is what happens after we die. And the answer is, what happens after we die? Well, first of all, if we're looking at it from an elemental perspective, first of all, Earth disappears. So that's the physical body. So Earth goes. Your blood goes first. That's the element of water. So the blood disappears, and then Earth falls away. That's your physical form, your body. And then you have your soul left, and that's fire. So imagine your blood has drained away, your body's gone, then you have your soul, and it's just a single flame. And then the wind element comes through and snuffs your soul away, and you're left in this precognizant state, without a chemical form with which to process any kind of concept or something akin to a feeling or an emotion, although debatable whether we can have those outside of our body chemistry. And you're left basically stripped down to your essential essence. And if you've never engaged with the feeling of what it's like to be left without a body in your life, this is an extremely terrifying state. And you will just pick any body to go into. So this is the Bardo state, and it's ruled over by the god Yama, who's the god of death. And he carries this wheel of life and death, and it's the wheel of your karmas. And you can't escape your karmas. And one of the trials of this state is to self-direct, to be able to get your soul to a position where it can best learn whatever lesson it needs to learn next, to go through whatever process is above whatever comes after the Bardo state. For certain sensibilities, the idea that this happens after death is perhaps not uncomfortable, just not believable. But I think that it makes far more sense, even if you want to call it a rationalist mindset, I think it makes far more sense in a rationalist mindset that our consciousness continues in some way rather than just completely disappears. I don't think that it's possible to escape from yourself. And if we're going to move into a dark space, I think that this is why taking one's own life is one of the most catastrophic things that can happen to a human being, because when one chooses to do that, one is choosing to escape the lessons that they've agreed to learn here. And they find in the Bardo state that they are face to face with all of the truths that they were unable to look directly at. And so you're not actually escaping anything by doing that. You are reconstituting your karmas, and you're being forced to face them in a new shape, which would be torturous, I can imagine, to get to the Bardo state and to feel that you're going to be freed from the suffering and torment that you've been encumbered by, only to find that it's reformulated itself in a new shape elsewhere. So for me, I view the Bardo state as something akin to the implicate order, which is discussed by Bohm. And this is quantum reality, so this is quantum physics. And I'll read now. One aspect of quantum reality that Bohm found especially interesting was the strange state of interconnectedness that seemed to exist between apparently unrelated subatomic events. So this is the thing about electrons. And if you don't know this about electrons, I'm very excited to tell you. And the electron thing is basically the best argument as for why the universe is a hologram. And it basically is that, first of all, electrons, so if you don't know, the structure of an atom, you've got in the nucleus protons and neutrons clustered together, and then on the outside you have a bunch of electrons. And electrons are negatively charged, protons positively charged, neutrons neutral, as you can imagine. And all of the elements on Earth are created by these little charges. Zit, zit, and zzz. And the more neutrons you have, the heavier the isotope becomes. So an isotope is like a different version of each element, thank you, in the periodic table. Now, electrons, they exist as a wave. They exist as a wave function until the point that they're observed, where they collapse into a particle. And they don't collapse into particles unless they're observed, which is to say that the electron, not that it wouldn't be fair to say that it knows that it's being watched, but rather that there is a co-constitutive relationship between the observer, the scientist, and the observed, the electron. And that the act of observation actually creates the property of the electron collapsing into a particle. So this was the assumption made by one of the founding fathers of quantum physics, the Danish physicist Niels Bohr. Bohr pointed out that if subatomic particles can only come into existence in the presence of an observer, then it is also meaningless to speak of a particle's properties and characteristics as existing before they are observed. This was disturbing to many physicists, for much of science was based on discovering the properties of phenomena. But if the act of observation actually helped create such properties, what did that imply about the future of science? And I've experienced this myself, and maybe other people have, in a yoga class. If I have a yoga teacher who like believes in me, as cheesy as it sounds, if I have a yoga teacher who thinks that I can hold a pose, I will hold that pose so much better than if I'm in a room with a yoga teacher who's got their ego up and who's thinking that they're the best in the class and that no one else can do the poses the way they can do the poses. I will never hit a pose so well as when I'm with a supportive yoga teacher. And I think it's because their active observation almost stabilizes me or stabilizes my waveform so as to be able to rest safely upon the earth, or stably upon the earth, I should say. So in fact, Einstein was very troubled by Bohr's assertion that about quantum physics, that subatomic particles collapse when they're observed. And he found it objectionable because it implied that particles were interconnected in a way that Einstein simply just didn't believe was possible. So because there was no sort of material or physicalization that explained why these particles were interconnected, Einstein was like, there's no way that it's possible. Then I'm going to skip some of the heavier science because I just don't think that we need to go into that. And according to Einstein, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. Now, these days, those of us who have gone down our rabbit holes know that this maybe is not quite so correct. But let us hold constant for a little while that Einstein's special theory of relativity holds true, that nothing can travel in the speed of light, let alone instantaneously. So a really important part of this is that electrons that are, conceivably, electrons that are on another side of the universe, like opposite sides of the universe, if they're linked and you affect one electron, the other electron will be affected in the same way. So Einstein doesn't like this intuitively because he feels as though the information, the idea that information could travel instantaneously is troublesome to him. And I think the whole point of this conversation is rather that the information is not traveling instantaneously, it's that those two electrons are one and the same thing. So just because they're separate from one another and they're moving in the same way, thanks to one being affected and the other one being linked to it, they're actually two parts of the same whole rather than two separate things. So they're part of an indivisible system. So interestingly enough, most physicists sided with Bohr and they became content that his interpretation was correct. One factor that was significant for Bohr's success was that it was really useful in predicting phenomena. So when Einstein and his colleagues first made their proposal about twin particles, technical and other reasons prevented such an experiment from actually being performed. This made it even easier to put out of mind. This was curious, for although Bohr had designed his argument to counter Einstein's attack on quantum theory, as we will see, Bohr's theory that subatomic systems are indivisible has equally profound implications for the nature of reality. Ironically, these implications were also ignored, and once again the potential importance of interconnectedness was swept under the carpet. Then we have another physicist called Bohm, so David Bohm. And David Bohm was a student of David Bohr's at Berkeley. And then he was working at the Lawrence Berkeley Radiation Laboratory. So this is David Bohm, and he encountered another striking example of quantum interconnectedness. This is about plasmas. And he ultimately came to the conclusion that plasma, which is a gas containing a high density of electrons and positive ions, they stopped behaving like individuals and started behaving like they were part of a larger interconnected whole. So this is all the science behind it. Then there was a split, I think, between Bohm. Bohm is trying to kind of balance both Bohr and Einstein's difference of opinion. Einstein really liked Bohm's presentation of quantum theory, but he was still dissatisfied with it. Ultimately, the quantum theory provided no real way of conceiving the basic structure of the world. It was ultimately incomplete, and it was not possible to arrive at any clearer understanding of what was going on in the quantum realm. This was the same as saying that there was no deeper reality beyond the subatomic landscape, no further answers to be found, and this too grated on both Bohm and Einstein's philosophical sensibilities. So David Bohm had to run away from McCarthyism, so they thought he was a communist, sadly. Simply, this is just about the inherent order in all things. So one of Bohm's assertions is that the tangible reality of our everyday lives is really a kind of illusion, like a holographic image. And beneath it is a deeper order of existence, a vast and more primary level of reality that gives birth to all the subjects and appearances of our physical world, in much the same way that a piece of holographic film gives birth to a hologram. Bohm calls this deeper level of reality the implicate, which means enfolded order, and he refers to our own level of existence as the explicate or unfolded order. So basically what's bringing to life this illusion around us is an unenfolded pattern that we've plucked out from the implicate. And when we put our minds together as human beings, we are basically almost like we're like dipping our auric hands in the implicate order, and we are plucking concepts out and we are putting them forth, and we're sort of nibbling them and tasting them and seeing how they flow together. And that's how we construct the explicate. So we interact with the implicate every day. Every single thought that we have is a means of interacting with the implicate order. And everything in the cosmos is made out of this same seamless holographic fabric that comes from the implicate. The explicate is kind of an illusion. So everything is part of a continuum. And even though there is an illusion of separateness at the explicate level, in fact, the explicate is a seamless extension of everything else having arisen from the implicate. And ultimately, even the implicate and explicate blend into each other. And this beautiful little binary shows up. I mean, I love a good binary, and I especially love binaries that slip into each other. I think maybe the most important thing about yin yang is that the most yin point of yang is when yin becomes the most yin, it switches to yang. And when yang reaches its full extent of yangness, it switches to yin, which is my favorite understanding of how these two things work, because it's like two fish jumping out of a river and switching into each other. And truly, concepts like this flip on their axes all the time. And this is why, at least when I was doing economics, I found it way more simple to put really complex numbers on the x and y axes when I was doing like comparative advantage. So if we draw it now and you put like on the y-axis and the x-axis, say we've got 2 and 4, and then we're plotting how many goods each nation can produce, given that it costs this nation $2 per unit and this nation $4 per unit to create hot dogs versus butter. It was so much easier to put more complex numbers on there, because when you have simple numbers, it's too easy to get the simple numbers confused for each other, because the binary can slip into itself really easily. And this sort of happens with gender too. I mean, gender is probably the most... Let's actually not unpack that yet. Are you still looking at me? Hello? Gender's for another day. But this book simply changed my life, because it really fits in with the new age ideas that everyone likes about manifestation and you creating your own reality. And I think that it gives a really powerful scientific grounding towards those ideas and why they work. For example, when it comes to miracles, which this book goes into, about people witnessing statues of Mary cry, or even seeing Mary herself come forth and bless people, there's strong evidence that belief and not divine intervention is the prime mover in at least some miraculous experiences. Which is to say that sometimes people can bring forth a divine experience with the power of belief. And when we get into the reads here, what we're looking at is, again, a binary switching on itself, because are we looking at divine intervention as a standalone thing that occurs without human control over it, or are we going to say that it's completely... So on one end of the spectrum, we have God creates interventions without us having any control over it. And on the other end of the spectrum, the more atheistic view would be that there's no such thing as divine intervention. And every time somebody has experienced something like that, it's been a psychosis or an imagination or hallucinatory experience of a divine being reaching out. And it's not actually got anything to do with divinity itself. And then we hit this middle ground whereby it is true that those people who are more likely to believe in divine intervention are more likely to have experienced something akin to it. And this is where the implicate and the explicate blend together, because we have the idea that with the power of thought, you're able to affect the implicate order and draw things up into the explicate order that you otherwise wouldn't be if you didn't have that faith. So prayer works. Prayer truly works. I know this. One time I was having a really bad day. I was having an awful day. And I told my friend about it, and then I went for a walk, and I was standing by this little this stream that I used to have near to where I used to live. And I'm standing by this stream, and all of a sudden, I'm like alleviated from the pressure of what I was feeling. And then my friend texts me and she says, "Oh, I just prayed to Mary for you." I felt it. And I've had other instances like this where I've accidentally proved that there is something in this, and more than just something. I mean, this is my whole shtick about how the function of reality works. But my friend, he's on a different time zone to me. I woke up from a dream. This was probably about more than a year ago now. But I woke up from this dream, and it was one of those dreams where I was passing through a whole bunch of different spaces and places, and I was seeing a whole bunch of different people. And from a distance, I'm like walking through, it was like I was in like an arena of kind of like a shopping mall, but like not as bleak, where I could pass by different shop fronts and I could pop in and like visit people. So I see my friend Monty, and he like waves me over and he's like, "Hey, I'm with all my family and friends, like come join." Monty's got a big family and a lot of friends. He knows everyone. So I come in and I come join, and we're sitting down in this bar, and it's red and it's pretty dark in there, and there's dark wood, and we're having a chat, and someone knocks over his drink. So I say, "No worries, I'll go get you a new one." So I go up to the bar and get him a new drink. And I ask the lady behind the bar, "What's all this for?" Because there was all of this sort of decoration, and it was a very kind of exciting evening. And she tells me, "Oh, it's Chinese New Year." So I take Monty his drink, and then in my dream, my phone beeps, which is funny because I feel like I only started having a phone in my dream like 5 years ago. I know some people say you never see your phone in your dream, but I do. Anyway, my phone beeps, and it's my other mate from college, and he's like, "Come this way." So I go that way, and I say bye to Monty. And then in the morning, I woke up and I messaged him, and I said, "Hey, I dreamt about you last night. We were in this red bar, and it was Chinese New Year." And he was like, "Get out." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "I had the same dream, but I didn't realize it was Chinese New Year." And I went, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I was in this red bar and you were there, and then there was like red lanterns and fireworks, and then some other things happened. But I didn't know that it was Chinese New Year." So we both had this same dream where we'd visited this same locale. And for people who are really good at dream yoga, this is not that crazy. There are people who lucid dream and they go meet up with each other on the astral and party and stuff. So this is not a big shock to some. But for me, it was very exciting. So that was one of my, actually nowhere near my most cogent experience with affecting the explicate through the implicate, but still one of the best examples that I have of sort of accidentally, it was almost like a controlled test, like it was almost like I managed to accidentally prove that consciousness is not local. Mystical experiences. Maybe we'll get to mystical experiences later. Oh yeah, when I first read this book, I was really interested in synesthesia. So I used to have it really strongly when I was a kid. I used to be able to see people's auras. My friends had colours. And then it just sort of went away one day. And I don't really think I didn't really notice when, but it disappeared along with a lot of my childish joie de vivre. It's funny how that happens. I think without getting too much into the yearning, when we live our lives completely in touch with the implicate, or as in touch with the implicate as we can be, none of these things are shocking. I think explain this to your average Joe from the Eora Nation prior to 1777 in Australia, and he's going to roll his eyes and say, of course. In fact, the dream time in Australia, I don't know where I got this, but it rings true for me. So the Australian dream time, the dreaming it's often said to be the sort of mythic origins of the world. It's like Aboriginal Australian cosmology. And it is that, and it's about how we created these land masses and how we got to be here and what it is that we're supposed to be doing here. But what it also is that when you're asleep and dreaming, say you're, walking through Gutty, which is the top corner of Watson's Bay in Sydney now. You're walking through Gutty with your friends and you all fall asleep by the campfire one night. And you dream that you and your friends are jumping off the trees from the cliffs into the harbour below, to the ocean below. There's no question in the mind of the Indigenous Australian that that was a shared dream between all of you. So this is what I think is really key about the dreaming and what I didn't understand about it until I started experiencing it myself. First of all, the dream time is now. It's always going. It's continuous. But also, the dreams that we have are shared. When you come across someone in your dream, when you dream about somebody, sometimes they're dreaming about you too, and they may not particularly remember it the way you've remembered it. Or not so much they're dreaming about you too. I think a better way to explain it would be that you're sort of engaging with a distinct part of them, like you're engaging with an inner self of them, because people dream about celebrities all the time. Like I've had dreams about Jacob Elordi. In fact, he comes up in my dreams quite frequently, just as like a friend, nothing more. Like we'll just like be walking around, and obviously Jacob Elordi doesn't know me from Adam, so he's not going to be dreaming about me. But it's more like because I'm given an image, and I don't even watch his films that much, so I'm not sure why he comes up. But anyway, and I don't even really have a crush on him. Anyway. Maybe I do. Anyway, you're sort of connecting. When you do dream about someone, the representation of them in the dream is them. It's like a deep part of them that comes from the implicate. And people who are super aware and super sensitive and who have really well trained their psychic abilities, there's basically a gap between what is reasonable to say in terms of social cues. So I struggle with this, where for me, I'll be in a social situation and there's something that's like extremely evident to me, and I think that it's extremely evident to everyone else. So I'll sort of just like say it, and then I realize that actually that wasn't socially appropriate to say, that actually wasn't extremely evident to everyone else. And I suppose the skeptic could argue that maybe I'm just misreading social cues, and maybe there's room for that to be the case, but I really don't think that it is. So back to what I'm trying to express here with the dream thing. When you come across someone in your dreams, you are connecting with a piece of them. You're connecting with their vibration. And I think that that's the key word here, is that there's a frequency that each of us have. So that's, I think, why it would be so difficult to be someone like really public facing. And I think a lot of Kylie and Kendall Jenner, of whom I am a big fan, both girls, because their vibrations were made so publicly available for so many people to sort of latch onto. And for a long time, there was like so much hate directed at them. And that's real energy. You can't get away from that. Just because someone's not consciously with you doesn't mean that you're not experiencing that hateful energy. That's why they have such powerful auras. And I think you can't deny that their auras are amazing. Because truly the only way to overcome negative energy is to get a stronger aura. And that can be really hard to do when you're mired in it. And I've been through this and kind of am still in the midst of it right now, where I've been dipped in a huge vat of just extremely heavy energy. And it is so difficult to drag oneself out of, because all of the practices that make you feel good, or that quote unquote raise your vibration. And I don't like saying raise, because I don't think that it's actually possible to do that, because you're changing your vibration if you do that. And your vibration is your like key signature. It's like your fingerprint. You can't change your vibration. That's if you were to change your vibration, you would become a different being. You wouldn't be this entity that you are. So I like to think of it more as like strengthening the vibration, like making your vibration louder so that the negative influences can't actually enter your aura. And the way you do this is by connecting with the natural world, like putting your heart space under bodies of water, swimming in the ocean, running, drinking really good water that you've purified or you've put good thought energy into. And ultimately it's thinking good thoughts. And when you've been through tough times in your life, or you've betrayed yourself, or you've been forced to betray yourself, or someone has let you down, it is so hard to get yourself to a position where you can viably strengthen your vibration. And there's no easy way out. And in the end, you just have to do it. And I literally do envision it as you or me being stuck in mud, like stuck in quicksand. And there's that meme that goes around a lot, and so many people repeat it as though they're being original. And who can blame them, because it's funny. That when I was a kid, I totally thought that quicksand would be a much bigger problem in my life. Like, one thought that we would be getting stuck in quicksand a lot more often than we actually were. And I don't know why this is such a universal experience. Maybe it has something to do with the types of media that we were consuming, but it's really true. I really did think that. And I think a lot of other people do. And I think that we are getting stuck in quicksand, but we're getting stuck in metaphorical quicksand. And I very much view it as almost like being dunked in like this vat, and you have to climb out of the vat, like a vat of oil, and you got to climb out of this vat of oil, and you're covered in this like demonic substance, and you can feel it on yourself, and other people can feel it on you, and it's so miserable and it's so shameful, and like there's no path forward except through. And the worst thing that you can do, and I'm so guilty of doing this, the worst thing that you can possibly do is go to different nodal points in time where you either made a decision or a decision was made for you, or there was like an event. The worst thing you can do is go to these different nodal points in time and imagine if things had gone differently. And I think the reason that this is such a bad thing to do is because, and I've done this, I've spent months doing this, you end up living in those timelines that don't exist here. You end up literally entering into these magical thinking time loops of, if only I had done this or I had done that. And it is such an unhealthy thing to do, but it is so tempting for the mind. And I think the reason that it's so tantalizing in this theory, in the theory of the holographic universe, the reason it's so tantalizing is that you can almost see, if you're sufficiently advanced with your psychic abilities, you can almost like view yourself remotely in those timelines that you didn't get to access because of the decisions that you made. And it is torturous. It's honestly the worst torture that I've ever been through. And it's me doing it to myself, which I think is the key to all good torture. I've done a lot of reading about torture and modern forms of it. And the most effective form is when we're forced to torture ourselves, which a lot of people think is what's happening on Earth. We sort of come here and put ourselves through these trials and put ourselves through the ringer. But yeah, the most effective way to torture yourself, if you choose, the most effective way to torture yourself is to envision realities that have forked or arced off a specific nodal point that you cannot access. And I think the reason they're so tantalizing is because you literally can, that version of you exists like half a dimension to the left, but you can't get there. And you can get there later on, like you can meet up quantumly with that form of yourself, because you can always make choices which get you to a better position. But like I said, when you've been dunked in the negativity, dragging yourself out of it and trying to strengthen your vibration is the hardest thing known to man. And I think there's been maybe 3 times in my life, including this one, where I've had to do this. And I am sick of it. I think the second time was the hardest for sure. And I sort of feel like each time this happens in my life, the third time was the hardest, the one I've just been through. Oh, no, the second. I feel as though it is all sort of emanating from that point. Like I said, I don't really believe that time is linear. We know that time is not linear, so things sort of unfold in upon themselves. And if you talk about this too much, like especially if you're talking to like psychologists and therapists, you're kind of at risk, because these ideas are non-normal, and people will start looking at you funny and start talking down to you and start speaking to you in a patronizing tone. So it's not so useful to talk about this openly. But here goes, me putting this on the internet. Because time is non-linear, the experiences that you have unfold in upon each other. And what has been useful or interesting about the experiences of distinct suffering that I've been through, like I said, these 3 nodal points, is that they seem to be interrelated, and they seem to kind of hold hands and reach to each other through time. And if there's one thing I can take comfort from, it's that if the bad stuff does that, then the good stuff must do it too. And there's been beautiful times in my life where things have felt so magical. And those things and those times do exist and will hold hands with other good times in my life that I'll reach. But yeah, strengthening one's vibration is really difficult. And I think that's because when it comes down to it, and this book speaks to these ends, that creative visualization is, or visualization, oh, it stopped face tracking me. Come back. Hey. Creative visualization is like one of the best ways to create stuff in your life. I have no idea how to do it. I don't sit down and script and manifest things. I always feel a bit silly when I do it. I try to pray before I sleep, and that really helps. You can clear things when you pray. Like, I literally feel things being removed from me when I pray. And every night, I don't do it every night, even though I'm supposed to, but every night I sit down and a part of me is like, oh, I don't want to do it. And that's the darkness. That's the darkness saying I don't want to do it, because it knows that if I do it, it's going to get cleared. Now, one more thing in this book before I stop it. Music. So each of us is essentially music. And that's why you get along with some people and you don't get along with other people, because we have these tonal frequencies, and sometimes when you meet someone, they clash. And this is also why sometimes when you meet someone and you at first clash, you end up getting along with them later on. And that's because music isn't necessarily always best when it's completely harmonious. So when I'm talking about people's vibrations and frequencies, these frequencies are literal frequencies that you can hear. And there are some people on Earth right now, I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but we're going through like this huge, people are like an upgrade or like an ascension. But basically there are some people on Earth right now who have just been gifted with these magnificent and somewhat terrifying psychic abilities. And the only reason that I know about them is because some of them reach out to my dad. But imagine you're a normal person, like working in a government department, and then all of a sudden you wake up one morning and you can see the implicate. Like, you can see these lattice works of light between objects and people and things and vibrations, and you can hear audibly each vibration. Like, you're basically living part of your life within the implicate order. And you can hear people's vibrance and people's resonance. So on that note, we are all music. And yeah, this is why sometimes when you meet someone and you clash, then you later come across them again and you kind of like get along. It's because the song that we're singing has reached a point where we want to have some discordance, because sometimes discord is not even just fun, but discord drives plot. What does discord do that's so addictive? It makes the harmony sweeter. And I think I would align it to like working out or like climbing up a mountain, and you're working your muscles and your muscles really hurt, and it's an objectively unpleasant sensation. But ultimately, I'm being really thirsty too. That's a good one. So you're walking up a mountain, and maybe I'm thinking this because I'm thinking about walking down into the center of the valley after I make this video. But say you're walking up a mountain, your ass is burning, you can't wait to drink water, and you're going through this pain and suffering. That's the discord. And then you get back to your car where you've parked it at the top of the nature reserve, you get your water bottle and you get to sip water. Oh my God, it feels so good. And if you hadn't had that discordant experience of working your muscles and experiencing extreme thirst, drinking the water would have felt nowhere near as mellifluous as it would have been. You would have not had as good of a time. And this is, I think, the function of discord. And almost, I think, as well, the usefulness of darkness. Because I've been thinking a lot, like I said, I've been through a really, really dark time. And people who have been guiding me through it who have been more attuned to the light have been very helpful, because they sort of will just reject darkness point blank. Like anything dark, they're like, no, get out. But I do think that there is value in examining the darkness and seeing the darkness for what it is, because sometimes I think it creates shape and it creates order, and it's sort of how we make art. And I think that if we were to exist in a realm or a dimension where there was just light, that's heaven. Like, there's a reason that we choose to exist in these dimensions where there is discord and darkness, and there is a sense of struggle. And I think it's because it makes things interesting. And like, I think I started this video, or very early on in this video, I said that one of the middle spiritual teachings rather is shut the fuck up. One of the middle spiritual teachings is to be quiet. Like, once you realize that everything is everything else, and that there are these wonderful patterns that are written into the dimension of reality, it doesn't ultimately change your life materially. That's not really what I was trying to say. What am I trying to say here? Darkness, discord. Oh, okay, yeah. So you can create really interesting patterns with the interplay of dark and light. And that is what makes for a good story. And that's what we're actually trying to do down here, is to experience good stories. Because that's all we really are. That's what a song is. It's a story. It's taking you through a journey. And so long as you know that, you're going to have an okay time down here. But sometimes it's really, really hard to make a good story. And you have to sort of drift through some neutrality for a little while before you can get back to playing with the darkness and the light in a way that's healthy for you and doesn't hurt people around you. So if that's what you're doing right now, congratulations, keep going. We're at a really weird point on Earth at the moment where I think the old institutions that we were a part of are starting to fall away, or they're not really making a lot of sense. Like, sometimes when I'm in an office, I'm like, what are we all doing here? Like, why are we dressed like this? Why are we pretending to do this? I have this creeping sense that it just doesn't make any sense. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way because it doesn't make any sense. So the old institutions are falling away. We have new ones that are being ushered in, but we still don't quite know what they're going to look like. So we're at this sort of crossroads. And I think that's the end of the video. I wonder if I have any more thoughts about the implicate order to share before I go. Oh yeah, I'm going to read you the final page because I find it to be quite moving. God, these flies are interminable. Right. So he talks about beings of light, that there are these beings of light. Oh, I haven't even spoken about, there's so much more I could speak about here. The imaginal, UFOs, we'll get to that another time. So he discusses these beings of light, which ultimately tell us that we are here to love and to learn. He looks at Whitley Strieber, who looks at, Whitley Strieber was the first guy to look at, he wasn't the first guy to look at it, but he wrote a book called Communion, about the abduction experience. Anyway. And that is why the beings of light tell us again and again that the purpose of life is to learn. We are indeed on a shaman's journey, mere children struggling to become technicians of the sacred. We are learning how to deal with the plasticity that is part and parcel of a universe in which mind and reality are a continuum. And in this journey, one lesson stands out above all others. As long as the formlessness and breathtaking freedom of the beyond remain frightening to us, we will continue to dream a hologram for ourselves that is comfortably solid and well-defined. But we must always heed Boehm's warning that the conceptual pigeonholes we use to pass out the universe are of our own making. They do not exist out there, for out there is only the indivisible totality, Brahman. And when we outgrow any given set of conceptual pigeonholes, we must always be prepared to move on, to advance from soul state to soul state, as Sri Aurobindo puts it, and from illumination to illumination. For our purpose appears to be as simple as it is endless. We are, as the Aborigines say, just learning how to survive in infinity. and that's Australian Aborigines. Well, thank you for listening. This is going to be the end of a series that I'm creating where I sit and have conversations outside.